Greetings, everyone. This is Jay Tucker. It's a pleasure to see you guys on a Friday. I know there's not anything else going on in the world today besides this conversation that we're about to have, and you should be super excited. As you see, I've got my Bruins clothing on today because we finally get a chance to sit down with an alum, Ryan Bishara. I'm super excited. We're going to talk about soccer here in the U.S. We're going to talk about Ryan's career, the business of sports, analytics, and more. So I'm going to jump right into it. Ryan, could you just talk a little bit about what you're up to right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks so much for having me, first of all.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure, my honor. So my name is Ryan Bashar. I've been with Los Angeles Football Club for the last 5 years, and I'm our head of business and data strategy, and have worked on building the entire business and data strategy function really from scratch, everything from analytics and automated reporting and data warehouse and customer experience surveying to ticket pricing and partnership inventory management and proposal development. So that team and function that we have basically drives a lot of the analytical and strategic growth initiatives for our revenue functions around the organization, as well as seeing how we can improve the fan experience through customer experience surveying and related initiatives. So really fortunate to be a part of an organization that, started from scratch back in really 2018, kicking our first ball at Bank of California Stadium that you can see behind me, and really excited to be here. So thank you.
So, it's funny talking about you were there from the beginning. I do want to get into that because a lot of the functions that you oversee have a lot to do with the fans themselves, only this club has been around before we could let fans into any kind of arena. Can you just talk a little bit about how your role has evolved over time? Because I'm sure that the stuff that you were working on back when this was all a great idea is not the same portfolio that you have now that we've got a really legit team and a strong fan base.
Yeah, great point. So when I started, I was the 15th employee, the second in the partnerships department, and I was the business intelligence analyst at that point, purely focused on just creating proposals, the initial CRM system we used, the process by which we would go out to market and identifying brands and companies we would partner with, all of the above. So as a part of that process, it was really a crawl, walk, run approach of engaging brands around the marketplace that might be a fit for us, identifying and scoring them, and then from there, starting to have conversations in the key categories, which you do sponsorship deals. Over time, that evolved into not just getting the partnership strategy function off the ground for that department and the ways that we actually work with our sales team and eventually partnership marketing team that services, manages, renews, and upsells those accounts, but also starting to work on everything ticketing related for the organization as we started going to start to sell deposits, sell and convert them to real locations in the stadium, define and determine the pricing for every asset, and then in every inventory item in the building from a ticketing perspective, all the amenities that were associated, and then from there, thinking about how we would do variable and dynamic pricing in the building when we actually launched it. So all of that scaled. And then eventually after that, say 2 years in, we were then thinking about, okay, we're about to start playing, we're about to have all of this new fan data that's going to be coming to us, behavioral data, demographic, socioeconomic data. How are we going to use that? Okay, we got to have a data warehouse to be able to store all that, leverage it, take advantage of it, create reporting from it, analyze it, create recommendations from it. So all of that is kind of how it evolved over time and went from just me to now a team of 6. So it's been a great experience, really fortunate to be a part of it. And, we've had a lot of fun along the way in terms of creating and innovating new process every single step.
So I know that many of you who are participating really are very familiar with the world of football, soccer, and how it plays out in the United States. Some of you are probably also fans or supporters of LAFC or some of the other MLS clubs out there. Nevertheless, I think for, just to level set, Ryan, if you could talk a little bit about, one, what's unique about the club structure and the club approach to fan engagement. And then also, because you mentioned pricing the various assets around the stadium, for people who haven't been to Bank of California Stadium, it's a pretty stunning facility. And if you could just talk a little bit about how the fan experience was woven into some of the features in the stadium, and how you think about that too, just so we can kind of kick off our conversation and give people a clear idea of what we're working with.
Yeah, definitely. So from a philosophical standpoint, from day one, our brand, our culture, the experience was built with fan feedback in mind. So if you look back to really 2015, we were even on social media engaging with fans on a colors campaign to understand what fans wanted the colors to be that are on the crests that we have today, right? On top of that, as we went through the process of having renderings of the stadium before it turned into what you see behind me as real life, we were doing design thinking sessions with our fans at, for example, Gensler, our architect's building, down to even working with our supporter leaders and members to create what would be the Heineken supporters bar that you currently see in the back of the 3252 supporters section that really is the lifeblood and the heartbeat of our stadium experience that when you come on match day, you see, right? So it's been really fun because that continual iteration of ideas and feedback throughout time, even continuing to still do design thinking sessions with our members holistically, whether you're in the 3252 or not, bringing them in to share in the way that we create merchandise, evolve and develop our food and beverage. On top of that, is really powerful because we constantly have a feedback loop between the in-person engagement with design thinking sessions, consistent surveying after every single match or event, and also intermittent surveys throughout the year to learn more about what people want to see more or less of. All of that is really powerful and really is what creates a truly engaged fan base that isn't just us being a brand that you see but you can't actually connect with. It's really important that humanization part of our engagement with people is important, and also in the community as well, as we do things from creating courts that futsal courts in the community at schools that we work with our partners on that impact the lives of the future generation, the future footballers. All of that is really key.
So you mentioned 3252 a couple of times. For those of you who are not as familiar, it's a section and it's a group of supporters. Ryan, could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, definitely. So the 3252 is a 501c7 organization. It's actually separate completely from LAFC, but it's an independent supporters union that has its own board, its own members. And on top of that, they all sit in the 3252 section, which is our supporters section on the north end of Bank of California Stadium. So that group and everything that's a part of it, they are essentially what have created that culture, the songs, the chants, their own community events, their own foundation. All of that is a part of it. So all we did was really provide a platform for them to grow, and they've really done it all themselves. And they meet on a regular basis, at least monthly, I believe, right now, to really just connect on the future and evolution of the supporter section in that union. They elect their own board, they elect their own leaders, all of those good things. So we're just here to support and provide guidance as appropriate. But in the end, they've created the culture, and really without them and all of our members throughout the rest of the building that also follow and listen and grow and support us, really our culture and the experience you see when you go to fans to our stadium and you see the engagement. It's because of that collaboration between the supporter section, our members, our holistic fans, and the way that becomes a word of mouth spread thing one by one throughout the city.
And that's the thing that I think for me has been the most exciting piece of the LAFC story so far. Club culture hasn't really stuck in the US. The ownership model doesn't really allow for that. The giant municipalities that teams typically represent, you don't always have that feel. But from the very beginning, it feels like LAFC really made an effort to have a club style presence in the community. And it really shows in terms of fan passion on game day, but also with respect to all the community outreach and community service projects that go on, which is really, really remarkable. And it leads me to ask you, because, you know, going about this in a different way, I wonder when you talk about, you know, ticketing and data and insights, for you, what are you working with? You know, how do you use data to create that engagement, to help fan that passion or to engage the fans?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, it's obviously really important. We're not, you know, targeting in any way that's, you know, inappropriate. But the most important thing is we learn and listen from what fans are liking, enjoying, and want to see more of. It's really that simple. So, if we're able to understand from the information that our fans are providing in terms of, say, take our members, for example, right? If the feedback that comes from them about our food and beverage experience or ticketing experience and activations or engagement that they want to see from our partners and brands, then we use that to say, hey, brand X or YouTube TV or, you know, Delta, Heineken, et cetera, here's what our members and fans would like to see in the future with you, right? Or, okay, we learned about how there's maybe a gap or something we can improve on from a food and beverage experience in this particular section or area or this particular club space. Let's work to improve that. Or, oh, we want to see more digital content that has inside access views to the player journey and their life on a match day. Let's provide more of that, right? So all of those different things are examples of the kinds of feedback that we get, use all from data we capture through the information that's provided from our fans. So without that feedback, that invaluable feedback, we wouldn't be able to really enhance what we're giving back to them. So those are examples of how we use it. And then of course, you know, understanding our fan base at an aggregate level, like the socioeconomics and demographics, to see what our fan base is, help communicate that to our potential partners and brands that are interested in engaging and providing a benefit to our fans. That's really important as well. So the combination of that, it's used both from a consumer angle and a B2B angle too.
So on the consumer side, are there any particular enhancements that you've been able to roll out thanks to the data?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things we did was really create a 90 before the 90, and what that means for context, right? You have the 90 minutes during the match where at that point you are 100% dialed in. You just want to watch the game, right? You don't want to be going up and down from your seat unless you got to go to the bathroom. But before that 90, right? The 90 before the 90 is really about getting fans in earlier to experience and take advantage of the amenities and food and beverage that's there, right? So creating discounts and offers that allow fans to have really, frankly, more affordable experience than you would during the match, and also creating an incentive such that they go into that experience and get to actually focus and dedicate their time to the game once it actually starts, right? So things like that. That's one example. Another example would be during this COVID window, right, which we've had, obviously every team and organization has had plenty of challenges with, is engaging with fans that way, right? So if all we have for now is a broadcast, that's all we can provide, plus social media content, well, we wanted to create essentially a second screen experience that can complement what you're doing when you watch the game on broadcast. So we partnered with a company called Excite to create essentially in our app a second screen where literally you can see the kinds of content that you would see when you were in the stadium on a video board, right? So everything from the Delta's starting lineup to the Toyota keys to the match to actually being able to select a song from the 3252 playlist of, you know, great songs that you want to see and listen to, all of those things, right? You can literally engage and watch with other fans at the same time while you're also watching the game. So an example of that virtual tailgate, right, that you can see directly on our mobile app, and is a way that we tried to innovate the experience to the best we can, knowing that, of course, there's a challenge with technology and so much of it these days, while simultaneously trying to engage people even more during what is, you know, a broadcast experience. It's not quite the same as what it was before COVID.
Yeah. Awesome. And I wanted to come back and talk a little bit about the partnerships piece as well. what's interesting about what we've been seeing over the last 4 or 5 years, all this streaming and other kind of evolution in consumer behaviors has made it a little bit more difficult for brands to connect to consumers through entertainment experiences, right? And so you see very different, a real diverse array of partnerships that can happen, particularly with sports franchises. Can you talk a little bit about, what that's been like, kind of cultivating those relationships? You just mentioned, some pretty cool partners, YouTube TV, Heineken, et cetera, Delta. How does that happen, for one? And what does the partnership space look like? I mean, it seems like some of these activations get pretty interesting.
Yeah, it does. It's actually one of the most fun parts, I would say, and I'm obviously a little biased, but the reason it's so fun is because we start with a blank canvas or a whiteboard, much like you have behind you, Jay. Mm-hmm. And we literally decide, okay, what is the craziest idea we can think of to come up with, right? Doesn't matter if we're talking to a food and beverage company or we're talking to a technology company. There are unique integrations for each brand that are relevant to their products that we can find ways to provide something to fans in a meaningful way, right? So examples are, there's basic things, right? Like doing player appearances that weave in, a product into an experience to promote and launch it, right? There's doing player endorsements that support the kinds of products that our fans have to grow and see and take advantage of. There's also things like, using the actual technology itself, like in the case of YouTube TV, and providing the broadcast inherently to fans and integrating them into that as a subscription service that provides that benefit and value of not just the broadcast, but also ancillary shoulder programming content. And then also the addition of a full cable, network that is all just either on your phone or your TV, et cetera. So the combination of those things are just, mere examples. And then in the case of Heineken, right, you've got the supporter section bar right behind you where they're providing benefits and discounts, but also on top of that, even more of an enhanced experience in terms of when you go there, you see a collaboration of art and football together in a space that makes you feel like you're like in another place in the world. So all those different things are just examples that we co-create and design together.
Love it. One of the things that I love, in addition to those colors, is the very interesting ways that you see some of that stuff manifest on social media, in the arena, and so on, right? It's just interesting, and when I think about how the business of sports is really an ecosystem, right? So obviously there's the kind of managing the venue, there's the club itself, there's merchandising, there are partners, there's media rights, and so on. Getting this fan piece right and getting this partner piece right, those are really two of the three legs of the stool, because it speaks to what people actually experience and how how LAFC shows up. Can you talk a little bit more just about, because you mentioned before the kind of some of the adjustments you've made thanks to COVID. Can you just talk a little bit more about what's happening now, what's going to happen going forward? Like, what will the fan experience be? What do you anticipate? That kind of stuff.
Yeah. Great question. So what we've seen during COVID, aside from the technology-based integration that we talked about earlier with like the virtual tailgate, right? And on top of that, creating more live social content with our commentators and our players, et cetera, to engage with fans and give them that inside access view. There's also things like, the way that we engage with them through more social and digital promotions and sweepstakes and offers that we're able to do. That's one big thing that we did. Obviously, the broadcast was enhanced. More of our fans, for example, were able to actually be visibly in the broadcast when we were in the bubble in Orlando, where you could literally see them from their living rooms chanting and excitement during games and when there were games scored or goals scored, excuse me. So all of those were the things that have happened right so far, right? During our current return to play phase, where we're playing in our stadium but just can't have fans because of our specific location and the legislation around it, we're even going as far as pumping in the sound of what the 32-52, like real actual chants from that into the building so that our players at least feel that when they're there, right? We're still running all the same video board components and digital signage that we would be on a normal match day. So it feels the same from that standpoint. Obviously, you don't have the actual fans there, but at least it sounds similar, as close as we can possibly get. And then that combined with other things we discussed kind of creates as much as we can, as close as we can, the experience that we're able to. Moving forward, though, as we return eventually to having fans in person, and that'll, probably start with less fans than we originally had, obviously, and scale up from there over time per legislation guidelines. It's going to be really important for us, and we're already doing quite a bit of things to ensure that we're going more contactless in terms of payment, right? We're going to have a lot more social distancing between people as they're coming into the building, as well as the way that we're thinking about queuing in lines, more of the pick up your food versus stand in a line for a while to get it. Mobile ordering was something that was really big for our CTO, Christian Lau, and something that we had actually rolled out before COVID, even, frankly, the late last year and early this year. And so now it'll just be taking it to a next level in terms of making sure that it's offered throughout the entire building. So that way it's something that enables the experience for fans to be safer while they're walking around the building as well. So things like that are just examples of the touch points that we'll do to ensure more of the fan safety. But we'll see that in time. Obviously, we're still getting there. It's going to be a while, most likely, before California has opened up, and we're eager for that, but want to do it right. And most important thing is protecting our fans and the health and safety.
For sure. So I want to remind folks that you can ask questions yourselves. We'll try to work them into the conversation. If you look at the bottom of the screen, you'll see a little Q&A button. If you click on that, you can send questions directly to me, and I'll either call on you to ask your question or try to work it into the conversation directly. We're almost at the bottom of the hour when I start looking for questions. So if there are elements of the business that you want to talk about with Ryan, please, queue those questions up. Let's keep the conversation going. And with that in mind, I want to see if we can bring in Nahum Armas Fuentes, who actually has a question about, the fan base here and bringing people to LAFC when we already had a team in the market. Nahum, can you ask your question?
Thank you for organizing this meeting. I have followed the team. I'm from Monterrey, Mexico, and I have been following the team since its creation when they announced that Carlos Vela, which is a very famous Mexican player, was going to play in LAFC. And I'm very curious, what were like the concrete actions that you make in your strategy to build up the fan base for LAFC? Knowing beforehand that there was a soccer team in LA, which is also an astounding team as a LA Galaxy, which I think it would not be like an easy task as other new MLS teams that they begin on a city where it will be like the first team or the first soccer team to be on that place. Like, I think for LAFC, it will be it was a huge challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for the question, and appreciate you following us from nearly day one. That means a lot, and it really is invigorating for us because we're still very young. So, to answer your question, we did go in knowing that we were competing with another team in the market and had to have a bit of differentiation, certainly. So the thing is, in this particular case, we understood the brand in this case that we were competing with, but weren't trying to, really focus so much on them as much as creating our own, special and unique identity, regardless, as if there were no teams in the market, frankly. And this approach wouldn't have changed if they were there, or if they weren't there, we still would have done the exact same things. So what we did very early on was ensure that we were creating grassroots events, even something as simple as a World Cup watch party, or even, watching El Clasico together with fans of, those teams that would get to learn about the fact that a brand new club was being started in their backyard in the heart of the city of Los Angeles. And that's simply it. By doing those kinds of events repeatedly for 3 years, and on top of that, having, solid social media engagement and content, the design thinking sessions that we did with fans to engage and understand more about what they would actually want to see and build together. All of those things are what created the culture, right? Helped recruit all the people that ended up joining the 3252 and creating those songs and chants that you now see in our stadium and all of that. So we're fortunate that there was a strong engagement, and it was the energy that we had for building the club is reciprocated by the excitement of being able to create something together. And really what motivated our fans more than anything, I think for a lot of them, and you can hear this directly from the supporter leaders, was, they wanted to create something that their grandkids and kids would be proud of, that they could say, I was there from day one, I helped build that club, and I actually contributed. I didn't just buy a ticket and go. I actually influenced what a specific part of that experience was or is. And it's something that lives on for generations and generations, no different than any of the other clubs in the world that are so prominent and have been around for, a century or more in many cases. It's no different than how they built it that long ago. It's just now we're doing it with different technology, different ability to connect with people and involve them throughout the process in an iterative way. So all of that are examples of what we did.
All right. I'm going to see if I can get a friend of mine, Greg Samarge, on because he has a question that I should have asked you earlier in this conversation. Greg, can you hear us?
There we are. Hey, Jay, how you doing, man?
All right. It's good to hear from you.
You too, buddy. It's great to see you in this role, and I shouldn't be surprised that you brought in a guy like Ryan, because Jay's got the connections to everybody. So thank you for doing this, and Ryan, thank you for being here, man. This is really an honor. I am a season ticket holder, a huge LAFC fan since day one, also, and I'm really fascinated by your role. Jay knows we've been in the same world for a while in digital, and I'd love to understand a little more about your background and kind of how you ended up in this role, and both from a professional and even personal standpoint, if you're into sports and soccer specifically before this. So thanks so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks, Greg, for your interest and passion and dedication. That obviously means a lot. And, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have this club without you. So first and foremost, that's the most important thing. As far as my background and role and kind of where I've come from. So I grew up in Los Angeles, born and raised. So for me, the city means a lot to me. And, this is where I've been pretty much my entire life. Went to UCLA for undergrad after high school, knowing that when I started my freshman year that I wanted to work in sports. I was growing up really a big NBA fan. That's like how I got into sports in general. And at that point, before knowing more about all the sports in the world and everything, I thought I wanted to be like, general manager of an NBA team, like every, young Lakers fan does. So that was always my aspiration. So in my path, as soon as I got to UCLA, really was fortunate to be turned on to the Sports and Entertainment Business Network, and then got connected to the Anderson students even while I was an undergrad, actually, to piggyback on a lot of their events to learn from their experiences. And frankly, was fortunate to be able to meet through that, actually, my first former boss, who was the former president of the Dodgers, and my boss with the Detroit Pistons and Palace Sports and Entertainment, and gave me my first job. So his name is Dennis Mann, and he spoke at an event at Anderson School of Business, and then was fortunate enough to get to know him, become friends. And then after doing so and staying in touch for the course of about a year and a half, he I said, "Hey, Ryan, I'm now the president of the Detroit Pistons. When do you graduate?" And I was just finishing my junior year, finishing up my communications major. And from there, it was like perfect timing. I'd finished a little bit early, my degree. So I got lucky in that it was the right place, right time, all during the lockout back in 2011. So was really fortunate that it all worked out, and then essentially got to learn from him over the course of the next 3 to 4 years, directly, like reporting to him in a project management role that was reorganizing all the departments at the Detroit Pistons and Palace Sports Entertainment, seeing what worked, what didn't, what was collaborating, what wasn't collaborating, all those things for an organization that frankly was, much more long in the tooth than LAFC is right now. And it was good to be able to have that experience though early on in my career, because by doing so, I got to see what worked and what didn't, and then how people reacted to that, especially those that had, say, been with the organization for a very, very long period of time and were a little bit, to be honest, more stuck in their way, right? So the good thing about then the transition of hearing about LAFC, applying to work for LAFC super early on in that period, and then being able to impact it with a blank canvas from day one is getting to have the understanding of now what NBA teams do on the business side, and also other leagues. I got to know other colleagues. I got to directly impact that into what I decided to do from a strategic and analytical standpoint, and the outreach and process that we did from a sales standpoint for LAFC, which was great because we got to take the best practices, but do it our own way and help our initial, first few group of employees really help create that vision. So that's my quick background. And, again, just really blessed that it worked out to be able to now work for a great organization that really stimulates innovation continuously in a really fun way. That's, really, it's the passion and the excitement that we get from doing that. What I learned, to your point about what sports I grew up with, at first I thought NBA was it and that's all I would ever want to work in. But the truth is, even though, I actually interned with the Galaxy, believe it or not, before LAFC existed, when I was in my freshman year, and I got that experience, got to know the sport a little bit. But then since then, after coming to work for LAFC, going to actually go abroad and watch games in the UK or even in South and Central America, literally went to Chile to watch games myself because I'm half Chilean. Like the combination of those things really actually made me enjoy football, and specifically the experience in the stadium and the engagement that comes from the supporter culture of football, because there's really no other sport in the entire world that has that way. And so now I'm hooked. I don't think I could work for any other team, even in LA, frankly, because it just it's not the same.
That's so funny. But thank you for sharing that, man. That's amazing. And we're lucky to be in LA in the sports market, but it's great to hear the transition and go LAFC. That's all. Thank you, man.
So with that in mind, Ryan, if this is a very interesting time for people who are in your position, who are in the position you were in when you were a student, where trying to start a career in sports is going to be a little bit more challenging, given the fact that, we have this kind of still somewhat volatile environment for live sports and the viability of whether or not we can host those things safely and what have you. And, that's had an impact, downstream impacts on media networks and vendors and brand partners and so on. Are there any bits of advice that you would give to students who are thinking about how they're going to use this year and or next year to get themselves into the sports business?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of things. So what I would suggest more than anything is that it's super important to have a sense of what you're aiming for, right? If I didn't know that I wanted to work in sports, I didn't know that I wanted to work for an NBA team and, even the department and function that I particularly work in now, all of that, I wouldn't have been able to pursue what I've gone into, right? And all of that comes from really experiencing and researching yourself, learning from people that are already in the roles that really influence the direction that you go. So that's what I would say is learning and doing informational interviews from people that are in the specific roles that you might find interesting, looking at job descriptions that kind of showcase the responsibilities and skills required is really important. And then actually trying it yourself by doing the informational interviews, asking about what you can do on your own time to just specifically try out some of the kinds of projects and think about yourself. You have to create a portfolio, right? If you don't have any experience and you haven't tried it or at least learned what the day-to-day is for a specific person in those kinds of roles, it really hinders your ability to be marketable in this very challenging time where you have so much, even more competition than we've ever had to be in these roles. So that at its baseline is the most important thing, because without that hunger and really persistence for growth and knowledge, you really can't get in, because there's so many people that are marketable. And simply that persistence, not having fear to reach out to people to ask for advice, is super key. And it's really important, especially in this time, just to be honest, that, we get outreach to all the time, every day, a lot more now than I did, when I was just starting because of my position now. But from the beginning, right, when people reached out to me, even when I was starting with the Detroit Pistons, you would get just people reaching out with resumes, and they would just like be asking for a job without even getting to know you. And it's just not the right approach, right? You by starting with just, I want to learn, here's what I want to learn about, and then taking that and building a real relationship with them, that's what turns into jobs. Not, hey, I want a job, ask for, here's my resume and attached and go. Because that solicitation, unless you're exceptionally already marketable, you probably would already have that job if you were that good. So it's really a matter of just the authenticity about actually learning from a person goes so much farther than trying initially to just ask for the job off the bat. So that's what I would suggest for those that are trying to get in or break in or want to learn and decide where they want to go in the industry.
And a follow-up question to that, because, you really had a journey before you landed in this role. And it's not just the professional journey, but as you said, you traveled to other places to see soccer played in other places and so on. Your understanding of your role and the way you can make an impact has definitely been deeply influenced by your experiences after you graduated from school. But are there any things that you learned as a student that help you in your role now?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually there's a lot of things, to be honest. And, one thing, if you were to look at my resume and compare it to people that are in similar roles as me, is you'll find something that is a little odd, which is that why is a person who's a communications major running data and analytics? There's very few, if any, people that are like that. Forget sports teams, just period. And the reason for that is I actually started as a math major, believe it or not. And to be honest, I wasn't invigorated doing it that way. So it doesn't mean I didn't like math, because I did in high school and middle school. Like, that was actually my best subject, and it's still in school. It is my best subject. But in order for me to be able to grow, it's hard to find people that use both sides of their brain, that know how to communicate exceptionally well, or can be very, very creative, but then also use really both sides of their brain, both analytically and creatively. So what I learned by switching to that major, actually, and focusing my time on learning how to communicate, learning about media, learning about marketing, all of those things complemented what I was already decently good at in math. I didn't need to be a mathematician to run a business and data analytics team. Sure, you can do that, you can be that, but you may miss out on some of those other skills that are actually, frankly, more valuable in many ways than being, the most sophisticated mathematician in the world. Because in the end, most of what we do in our roles is we're a consultant to people throughout every single department in the organization. We are working with people. We are communicating with people. We are understanding challenges. We are working through questions that they have, and we're trying to find answers for them. And we're trying to prescribe recommended suggestions and changes. If we don't have a way to relate to people, it doesn't matter how smart you are, and it doesn't matter how crazy a model you can build to solve a challenge. If the person at the other end of the table doesn't understand it or can't relate to it, it doesn't matter. So I think that more than anything was really like the biggest blessing I got was, aside from being at a school that is exceptionally prominent and, provided instant credibility for me, it's actually more that I learned the skills that I needed to now be more versatile in my role today, right? I couldn't be on the front lines of sales meetings with CMOs, for example, at brands if I didn't have those skills. And if I hadn't gotten that, I'd just be a data person that wouldn't be able to be in those settings. So that's really where it increased, frankly, my ceiling for growth immeasurably, because now I can really relate to just about anybody. And before, it would have just been the people that understood what I did technically.
So it's interesting that you bring that up, because one of the things that I see sometimes, and it's funny, but you kind of touched on a couple of things. First of all, I love your journey with mathematics. I think a lot of us really had a passion for math at an early age. And one of the challenges is trying to figure out how to deploy that skill set when you get older, right? And how to keep that connection. The other piece is, you remind me of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where, folks build a computer, takes them thousands of years to answer the ultimate question to life, the universe, and everything. And the answer is 42. And folks like, wait, what? 42? It's like, well, that's the answer. What you really need is to understand what the question is, right? And I feel like what often gets lost when we talk about data, analytics, machine learning, artificial intelligence, predictive business intelligence, et cetera, is the art of communicating the insight, right? Because it's not really about the data. It's what have you learned from the data and how you can act upon it. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about, just for the benefit of people who are thinking about how they're going to use, because some of our students even are pursuing master's degrees in business analytics. How do you use that understanding that may come from the numbers to help somebody to see the world the way you see it, or to recommend a course of action, right, in a meeting? Because I'm sure it's not enough to say, well, look, here's the chart. So what do you look for, and what do you think makes a difference?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I can say from the experiences that I've had with LAFC specifically too, as having more control, frankly, into the building of this function and the way that it's operated. You can, like you said, Jay, like you can create a million graphs and charts. You can make the prettiest dashboards in Tableau you can ever imagine, but if it's overkill, it doesn't matter. All you need is, what are the takeaways, right? Like I remember being in meetings with our executive team leadership, working through even like ticketing projects and scenarios. And you look at, okay, if we price it at this and you price it at that, and what's the revenue output and how does that relate to our expenses, and look at profit, all that. But you can do that, and you can make a really sophisticated and analytical, analysis that you show on a slide or 2 or 10. But in the end, they're like, tell me what I need to know to make a decision. What is the outcome? And so simply what we do is we try to tell them what we're going to tell them, then tell them, and then tell them what we've told them and why it's the best course of action. That's simple. So you can apply that to why we're deciding to make a price change from X to Y, why we want to make food and beverage different in specific area of the building, why we've heard all this fan feedback about the way that we create merchandise and the way we engage with more fans with that. And all of that comes down to, here are the results that provide a specific recommendation. Here it is, right? Or, we want to do dynamic pricing and there's a million different price points in the building, but we need to make those changes. Well, why are we making that change, right? Like one of the models we have that we built really from scratch with a company called Gains Group that we work with. The most important thing, the secret sauce of the whole thing, was actually showing the why. Like it's one thing to spit out, like you can work on a model that sounds really sophisticated, have 50 PhDs work on it, and it's really, really, really smart. But if you don't understand what you're looking at or why it actually occurred, it doesn't even matter, right? So in our case, we wanted to say, well, in the output of the actual model. So, okay, we're saying for this particular match against Colorado on a Wednesday, we should go down, $5 on this particular price. Okay, well, why is that? Oh, well, it's because, this section has, a few seats still available. We have X many days before the match, and, all the prices that we're competing with around it are the following prices. So therefore, we should make sure we're, competitive, so that way our fans want our tickets versus others. Like all those things, right? All those are part of the decision-making process, but without having that why actually spit out when you create a recommendation, whether it's for tickets or sponsorship and doing a recap with a brand or anything, all of it kind of goes away. So it's really, really important to have that prescription be really clear and digestible, because without that, kind of missing the clear action to be taken next, and actually believing it and understanding it and having trust in the mathematical process, because it's really easy to get it very complicated. It's very hard to create something that can succinctly be explained from something that's very complicated. And that's really the challenge. That's tough for many people to solve.
Yeah. And I would think that in an organization as fan-centric as LAFC, often the why is because the fans. How far does that extend, though? I mean, we were talking about ticket pricing and concessions pricing. What about scouting and development? Like, do you ever incorporate fan sentiment into a decision about, players to potentially try to go out and acquire or players to keep, et cetera? Like, does fan sentiment go all the way into the business, or is it really limited to certain areas?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I wouldn't say like the influence of a fan to say we don't like this player, we like this player. Like that's not really what goes into making a decision like that, for sure. But what we do take into account is our mission for the organization is to unite the world city through the world's game, right? That if that's our mission and our purpose and in the way that we want to create a lasting impression on the sport holistically, well, that means that if our city is exceptionally diverse, then so should our players be. So that's why when you look at the makeup of the players on our field right now, our starting lineup or even the complete roster, you'll see players from Africa, from Europe, from South America, Central America, United States, et cetera, right? And in Canada too. So all of that, because we have the belief that it's really important to have that diversity, because it represents the multicultural melting pot that Los Angeles is and everybody loves. So that was a conscious decision into the makeup of the club, because that's what we know represents the city most impactfully. So it's one thing to have, players that are really, really strong and really exceptional in what they do, but it's also another to have that diversity makeup of also your fan base so they can relate to it. That was super important. That's an ethos of the club, and it isn't overpower necessarily decision, because in the end, what results are results and talent is talent. But as long as we can weave it in a thoughtful way, and to your point, Jay, weave it into our scouting and development efforts, right? Which, we literally signed a player from Africa, 2 players actually, between Latif Blessing and a few others. Like all of those players come from different backgrounds that we appreciate the variety in their cultural experience. And also we understand that access to the game globally is really important. So being able to foster the talent that's everywhere, not just even in our backyard, as much as there are going to be great players locally, we also should be looking everywhere. So that diversity is really important.
So I want to paraphrase a question that we got. You've been with this organization really from its inception, and you've been deeply involved with understanding kind of the inputs to making these decisions around ticketing, partnerships, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and obviously working directly with the folks who are handling the operations, helping to build the brand, et cetera. There's been so much success, and I don't know that you can necessarily distill that down into these are the do's and don'ts if you're bringing a franchise into a new market. But like, are there a couple of things that you feel like you learned about, how you roll out a franchise in a market like LA where you've got other franchises, other sports, et cetera, how you kind of introduce a brand? Anything that you can share that you feel like, played out that you learned from?
Yeah, actually, it's a lot simpler than it sounds, or that it could be, or that it seems, I should say. Listen, and incorporate. That's really it. That's all we did, and ask for help. That's it. So if going back to all the examples we talked about today, we engaged with people, asked what they wanted, implemented, took it into account, and then made a decision, asked again, and you keep going back and forth. It has to be a conversation. It shouldn't just be, boom, here it is, take it or leave it. If you do that, then how do people relate to it if they haven't even provided input on it? And especially when you have a lot of competition, in our case, right? In LA, it's the most competitive. Between us and New York, we have the most teams in a central market, right? So we just went into it not worried about the competition, but purely just ensuring we were doing that the right way by listening, incorporating, involving, enrolling. Without doing that, the culture doesn't get built, and it's not authentic, frankly. So simple. It's the same way if we want to, unite the World City through the world's game, and that means the diversity of the LA community represented on what's in the field. It's the same thing with what we do with the fan experience. It's no different. And it's the same thing in the makeup of our fans, is ensuring that we're open to everyone and anybody, that we welcome all, regardless of any of their beliefs or backgrounds or anything. And we listen to what they say. And it doesn't mean we can do everything, because obviously you can't, but you do the best you can. And as long as they're listening and they know you're listening, because they, you take action as a result of some of those things that are said, then at least you're doing the best you can. And that's really what shows. And it's easy to say, it's hard to do unless you have full commitment from ownership and executive teams, et cetera. But if you do it well and you do it genuinely, it pays off in spades. And then it's just a matter of time, one by one, connecting with every person that could be a potential member, fan, collaborator, partner, et cetera.
That's also where you need to have strong leadership. And I mean, not just senior leadership, but you need to have folks with strong leadership qualities up and down the organization, and the ability to execute, right? Because you can learn from the fan base and from other franchises and so on. But the implementation is the key, right? I mentioned the stadium before, and for those of you who've never been to Banc of California Stadium, you are missing a treat, because I think it's really the nicest, most thoughtfully created arena in Los Angeles, right? But that takes execution. It's not just a question of the listening, right? You have to have people who can do it. I wonder, we got a couple minutes left. I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about some of the qualities that you think make people successful in the sports space. What kinds of things do you look for? What kinds of things, what kind of attributes of the people on your team do you think lead to organizational success? Yeah,
happy to. And it's a really great question. So I'll say this, the makeup of our organization is very diverse. You have people that worked in entertainment, have people that worked in nonprofits, for foundations, in finance and consulting, all over the board, right? And that diversity is key, because it creates just as much diversity as you get from fans, you have it inside the organization. Without that, there's no innovation. So that was really important from day one. And then also the impact of the leadership team and actually listening internally to feedback, just as important as it is from listening externally to feedback and suggestions and recommendations that come up. So I think without that from our, president, owners, et cetera, and executive team members, nothing happens. There's no movement. The execution that you mentioned, Jay, doesn't happen. So the last part, just to reference, for me and what I look for our team, right? I kind of mentioned a little bit about this earlier, but to make it really specific, right? I give every single person that we might potentially hire or have as a part-time member a specific assignment. And it's not a super complicated assignment, but it demonstrates the way they think, how thorough they are, and how detail-oriented they are, and how they communicate. So one side, we give one part that's, here's the name of a company or a brand, and research it as thoroughly as you'd like, and then give us ideas for how you would partner with that brand if you worked for LAFC. What would all of the ideas be? If you're presenting to the CMO, tomorrow, what would you be suggesting as a collaboration between LAFC and a brand? Test your communication skills, test your creativity skills, test your research skills, and your detail-oriented approach. Then on the other hand, we give a data set, a sample data set of information on food and beverage, right? And you look at it and you're like, okay, you can take this data set and do anything you want with it. You can use any softwares you want, any tools you want, name it. Simply look at that assignment and tell us what you see. Tell us what you find. What are your recommendations? What are your suggestions? What are your improvements? It's so open-ended, but that's the best part, because it tests creativity, tests creative, communication, and then it tests how thorough they want to be and also how technically skilled they are. So on one hand, you have something that's completely research and creativity based, and then on the other side, you have something that's appropriately analytical to showcase that. So the perfect candidate can do both really well and at a high level using all the tools in the world. But in the end, what it really comes down to is what we talked about earlier. If the communication isn't strong, if the kinds of questions they ask during the process of doing the assignment, because we actually let them ask as many questions as they want while they're doing it. If they don't ask any questions, but the output's poor, or they ask a bunch of questions, but they're not the right questions, or they put in all this work and time into it, but you don't understand it, or it's not easy to digest, well, that says a lot about that person. So those are examples of things that we look for.
Love it. All right, I know we're out of time. But I could talk to you about this stuff all day. Thank you so much for coming back to Anderson, coming back to UCLA to share some of your experiences with us. We wish you all continued success. Hope to see you again soon. Thanks to everybody who participated. We'll have a recording of this up at some point in the future. But if you have other questions about LAFC, about football here, MLS, etc., please feel free to ping the center, because this is not the last time that we're going to be talking soccer. All right. Have a wonderful Friday, everybody, and thank you for giving us a slice of your attention today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jay. Take care.